The day my HOA tried to have me arrested was the day they lost control of everything. It started with 3 black SUVs rolling through the gates like they owned the place. Tinted windows, no plates on the front. The kind of quiet, controlled movement you don't expect in a peaceful luxury community. I was standing on my driveway when they pulled up, coffee still warm in my hand, watching as 4 men in matching tactical uniforms stepped out like they were executing a warrant. Except, they weren't law enforcement. They were private security. And they were here for me. My name is Edward Carter. I'm 45 years old, and I don't scare easily. I've built my life around staying 10 steps ahead of people who think power comes from titles and rules. Out here, in this polished neighborhood of glass houses and fake smiles, I kept to myself. No parties, no noise complaints, no problems, until Betty decided I was one. Before I go further, quick pause. If you're watching this, I'm actually curious. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where power gets flipped on its head, make sure you like the video and subscribe. Trust me, this one only gets better. Now, back to the morning everything changed. The lead guard stepped forward like he practiced intimidation in the mirror. Broad shoulders, dark glasses, hand resting just a little too comfortably near his belt. "Edward Carter?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just enough to throw him off. Depends who's asking. He didn't like that. I could tell. "We're with Ridgeline Security," he said, flashing a badge too quickly for it to matter. "We've been contracted by the Homeowners Association. You're in violation of multiple property codes. We're here to escort you off the premises." Escort me? Off my own property? I almost smiled. "Let me guess," I said calmly. "Betty sent you." He didn't confirm it. Didn't need to. Behind him, one of the other guards had already started walking toward my front door like this was routine, like they'd done this before. That's when I set my coffee down. "Stop," I said. Just one word. Calm. Controlled. But it worked. The man froze mid-step. "You don't take another step on my property," I continued, my voice steady. "Not unless you're ready to explain to a judge why a private security firm is attempting an unlawful eviction." The lead guard shifted slightly, not backing down, but not pushing forward either. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here on solid ground. They were here on orders, and orders can be wrong. "You've been issued multiple notices," he said, trying to recover control of the situation. "Failure to comply gives the HOA authority to take enforcement action." I tilted my head slightly. "Enforcement action doesn't mean trespassing." There was a pause. Then, right on cue, a 5th car pulled up behind them. White, clean, government plates. Now that was interesting. 2 police officers stepped out, adjusting their belts like they already knew how this was supposed to go. And just like that, the situation shifted. One of the officers approached, his expression neutral, but his tone already leaning in their favor. "Sir," he said to me, "we've received a report that you're refusing to comply with lawful HOA enforcement. We're going to need you to step away from the property while this gets sorted out." There it was. Not an arrest, not yet, but the setup was clear. Apply pressure, create confusion, push me out temporarily, and then make it permanent. I looked at him for a second longer than necessary. "Officer," I said, "are you aware that this is privately owned property?" "Yes, sir." "Are you also aware that a homeowners association does not have the legal authority to remove an owner without a court order?" He hesitated. Just a flicker, but I caught it. That hesitation told me something even more important than anything else that morning. He didn't know, or worse, he didn't care. Behind him, I saw movement. Betty, standing across the street like she was watching a performance she paid for. Pink suit, sunglasses, arms folded like she already owned the outcome. She gave me a small, almost polite smile. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about rules. This was personal. And she had already decided how it was going to end. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we're trying to resolve this peacefully." "So am I," I replied. Then I reached into my pocket, slowly, carefully. Every eye on me tightened. Security guards straightened. One of them even shifted his stance like he was ready to react. All I pulled out was my phone. I unlocked it, tapped twice, and turned the screen toward the officer. "Here," I said. "Property deed, registered under my name. No liens, no active legal actions. You want to remove me? You bring a court order." He looked at it, actually looked at it, and that's when things started to crack. Behind him, the lead security guard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Officer, we were told—" "I know what you were told," I interrupted, not raising my voice but cutting straight through the tension. "The question is it legal?" Silence. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Across the street, Betty's smile faded, just slightly. She didn't like uncertainty. People like her never do. The officer handed my phone back. Then he took a step back. Not away from me, away from the situation. "We're not making any arrests today," he said. That one sentence changed everything. The guards looked at him, then at each other, their confidence gone, replaced by hesitation. Because now, they weren't backed by authority anymore. They were exposed. The lead guard adjusted his stance again, trying to salvage control. "This isn't over," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know." They started pulling back, one by one. No more threats, no more movement toward my house, just controlled retreat. The SUVs reversed out of my driveway like they suddenly remembered where they were. And just like that, they were gone. The officers followed shortly after, leaving behind nothing but silence and a very different kind of tension. Across the street, Betty didn't move. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. Then she gave me a small nod. Not friendly, not respectful, just acknowledgement. Like she was saying, this was only the beginning. I picked up my coffee again. It was cold now. Didn't matter, because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what just happened. I was thinking about what it meant. She didn't just send security. She coordinated it with police. She pushed the limits of what she could get away with and expected me to fold. That told me two things. First, she had influence. Second, she was sloppy enough to use it. And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to file a complaint. I wasn't going to argue with the HOA. And I definitely wasn't going to wait for her next move. I was going to find out exactly who those security contractors were, who licensed them, who they answered to, and most importantly, what it would take to own them. Because if Betty thought she could use hired muscle to push me out of my own property, she was about to learn what happens when the muscle changes sides. And when it doesn't just protect you, it turns the entire game in your favor. That morning wasn't a loss for her, not yet, but it was a mistake, and I've spent my entire life knowing exactly what to do when someone makes one. By the time the last SUV disappeared past the gates, I was already inside, pulling up everything I could find on Ridgeline security. I don't react emotionally, never have. While most people would have spent the next few hours arguing with neighbors or calling lawyers, I did what actually matters. I started digging. Because people like Betty don't win through strength. They win through systems, and systems always leave a trail. I sat down in my home office, a quiet, controlled space with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the street she thought she controlled. From there, I could see everything, including her. She was still outside, still watching. That told me something important. She wasn't done, so neither was I. I opened my laptop and typed in the name the guard had given me, Ridgeline Security. At first glance, they looked clean. Professional website, corporate language, residential enforcement specialists, asset protection, compliance operations. That last one caught my attention. Compliance operations. That's not standard language for residential security. That's enforcement. And enforcement, without legal backing, is where things get interesting. I started pulling business records, licensing data, ownership structures. It didn't take long before the cracks started to show. Ridgeline wasn't some elite firm. It was barely holding itself together, registered under a holding company that had changed hands twice in the last 3 years. Multiple complaints filed in different counties, most of them quietly settled. No major contracts, no real reputation. And yet, they were confident enough to walk onto my property like they had authority. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when someone tells them they're protected. I leaned back in my chair, connecting the dots. Betty didn't just hire them. She gave them the impression that whatever they did would be backed. That meant one thing. Either she was lying to them, or she had connections strong enough to make them believe it. Both options worked in my favor. I kept digging. Licensing records came next. Every private security firm has to operate under strict regulations, state approvals, active compliance, insurance coverage. You mess that up, even slightly, and your entire operation can be shut down overnight. And that's exactly where I found it. A gap. Small. Easy to miss. But not to me. Their operational license had been renewed late just 6 months ago. Technically valid, but flagged. That kind of delay usually comes with conditions, extra scrutiny, restrictions on certain types of enforcement actions. Like, for example, removing someone from private property. I smiled. There it was. They weren't just aggressive, they were operating on the edge of legality. And today, they stepped over it. I opened another tab and started checking financial records tied to their parent company. That's when things got even more interesting. Debt, a lot of it. Short-term loans, missed payments, liquidation warnings on 2 smaller divisions. Someone had been trying to keep this company alive, and failing. That changed everything, because a weak company is predictable, and predictable companies can be controlled. I picked up my phone and made a call. It rang twice before the voice on the other end answered. Yeah? I need a full breakdown on a private security firm, I said. Ridgeline security, ownership structure, liabilities, active contracts, everything. There was a pause, then a short chuckle. You already found something, didn't you? I always do. Give me a few hours. Take one, I replied, and hung up. I don't outsource thinking, but I do outsource speed. While I waited, I stepped back outside. The street was calm again, quiet, controlled, like nothing had happened. Except now, people were watching. Curtains slightly open, neighbors pretending to check their mail a little longer than usual. That subtle shift in attention you only notice when you're looking for it. News travels fast in places like this, especially when it involves Betty. And right on cue, she made her move. She crossed the street slowly, heels clicking against the pavement like she wanted every step to be heard. Pink suit, perfect posture, that same controlled smile back on her face. "Edward," she said as she approached, "quite the scene this morning." I didn't respond right away, just watched her, let her fill the silence. "They told me you were being difficult," she continued, adjusting her sunglasses. "I was hoping we could avoid this kind of escalation." I almost laughed. "You sent private security to remove me from my own property," I said calmly. "That's not escalation?" Her smile didn't break. "It's enforcement," she replied smoothly. "You've ignored multiple notices. At some point, action has to be taken. Action requires authority, and we have it." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You think you do." That hit, just enough to shift her tone. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, dropping the politeness just a little. "This community has standards, rules. You don't get to ignore them just because you think you're above everyone else." I stepped closer. Not aggressive, just enough to make the conversation real. "I don't ignore rules," I said quietly. "I ignore people who misuse them." There it was, the line. The moment her expression changed, just slightly, but enough. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I replied. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she turned and walked away without another word. No threats, no shouting, just confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've already won. I watched her go, then turn back toward my house. Because while she was playing control games out in the open, I was already 3 steps into something she couldn't see. My phone buzzed in my hand. Right on time. I answered. "Talk to me." "Ridgeline is worse than you thought," the voice said on the other end. "They're bleeding money. If they don't secure a major contract in the next quarter, they're done." "How much to take control?" There was a pause. Then, "Less than you'd expect." I nodded slowly. "Good. And Edward, there's more." "Go on." "Their current leadership? Not exactly clean. There are complaints, serious ones, use of force, unauthorized removals. Nothing that's stuck, but enough to raise flags if someone pushes it." Perfect. That wasn't a problem. That was leverage. "Start preparing the paperwork," I said. "I want options, partial acquisition, full buyout, whatever gives me control fastest." "You're not wasting time." "I don't plan to." I ended the call and stood there for a moment, looking back at the street, at the houses, at the perfectly maintained illusion of order. Betty thought she was enforcing rules. What she didn't realize was, she just handed me the one thing I needed most: access. Because once I owned the company she used against me, this wouldn't just be about defense anymore. It would be about control. And when that switch happens, people like her don't adapt. They collapse. I walked back inside, already mapping out the next steps in my head. Acquisition first, then restructuring, then deployment. No rush, no noise, just clean, precise moves. because the next time Ridgeline security showed up at my house, they wouldn't be there to remove me. They'd be there to protect me. And Betty? She wouldn't see it coming. By the next morning, Ridgeline security wasn't just a name on my screen anymore. It was a target. I don't chase revenge emotionally. I build it structurally. And right now, the structure was simple. Gain leverage, apply pressure, take control. Everything else comes after. My contact had already sent over a preliminary report before sunrise. Financial breakdowns, internal hierarchy, pending liabilities, even a list of their current contracts, which, to put it simply, weren't impressive. Ridgeline wasn't powerful. It was pretending to be. And that's the easiest kind of company to dismantle. I sat at my desk, scanning through the documents while the early light filtered through the glass walls. Most people in this neighborhood were just starting their day. Coffee, emails, routines. I was already planning a corporate takeover. There was one name that kept showing up at the top of every document. Marcus Doyle, CEO, majority stakeholder, the man technically in charge. I pulled up his profile, mid-50s, former operations manager for a larger firm before branching out on his own. No major scandals, but plenty of close calls. The kind of man who operates just inside the line, until someone pushes him out of it, which is exactly what I was about to do. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed under his corporate contact. It rang longer than expected. Then finally, Marcus Doyle, direct, no assistant. That told me a lot. "Mr. Doyle," I said calmly, "my name is Edward Carter. We need to talk." A pause. Not confusion, recognition. He knew exactly who I was. "I was wondering when you'd call," he replied. Of course he was. "Then let's not waste time," I said. "Your team stepped onto my property yesterday under false authority. That's not a small mistake. It was a contracted operation," he said carefully. "We were hired to enforce HOA compliance. Enforcement doesn't include unlawful removal." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll admit," he said slowly, "the situation may have been misrepresented to us." That was his way of saying he knew they crossed a line. "Good. That misrepresentation is now your liability," I replied. "And from what I've seen, your company isn't in a position to absorb many more of those." Silence. Then, "What do you want, Mr. Carter?" There it was. Not denial, not aggression, straight to negotiation. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment settle before answering. "I want a conversation," I said. "In person." Another pause. He was thinking, calculating. "Where?" he asked. "My office," I said. 2 hours. That was intentional. Short notice creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. "Fine," he replied. And just like that, the door opened. I ended the call and stood up, walking toward the window. Across the street, everything looked normal. Too normal. That fake sense of control this community thrives on. It was still intact, but not for long. Because in less than 2 hours, I'd be sitting face to face with the man Betty trusted to enforce her authority. And by the time that conversation ended, he wouldn't be working for her anymore. Marcus Doyle arrived exactly on time. That alone told me he took this seriously. Black sedan. No security this time. No show of force. Just him. Good. He stepped out wearing a dark suit, slightly worn at the edges. Not sloppy, but not the kind of sharp you see in companies that are thriving. He walked up to my door, and I opened it before he could knock. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Marcus," I replied. "Come in." No handshake. Not yet. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the space quickly. Not in admiration, but assessment. He was trying to understand who he was dealing with. I let him. Then I gestured toward the seating area. "Sit." He did. I stayed standing for a moment longer, just enough to establish the dynamic, then took my seat across from him. No desk between us, no barriers, just conversation. "You've got a problem," I said. He exhaled slightly, like he expected that. "We've had challenges," he admitted. "That's one way to put it," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. He looked at it, didn't open it yet. "You're carrying short-term debt across 3 divisions. 2 of them are already flagged for liquidation. Your licensing is under conditional review. And yesterday, your team walked into a situation that could trigger a full investigation." Now he opened the folder, flipped through it, page by page, each one confirming exactly what I said. When he looked back up, the confidence was gone, replaced by something more honest. "How do you have this?" he asked. "I pay attention." That was enough. He leaned back slightly, processing. "So what is this?" he said after a moment. "You bringing me in here to threaten me?" "No," I said calmly. "If I wanted to threaten you, I'd go to the licensing board first." That landed, hard, because he knew I meant it. "Then what?" he asked. I leaned forward slightly. "I'm giving you a way out." Now I had his full attention. "Your company is unstable," I continued. "You need capital, structure, protection. And right now, you don't have any of that." He didn't argue, didn't interrupt, because every word was accurate. "I'm offering all three," I said. Silence filled the room. Then, "You want to invest," he said. "Not invest," I corrected. "Control." There it was, the line that changes everything. He didn't react immediately, just sat there, staring at me like he was trying to measure the weight of the offer. "And what happens to me?" he asked finally. "That depends on you," I said. "You can stay on, operate under a new structure, or you can walk away with more than this company will be worth in 6 months. He let out a slow breath. "You move fast," he said. "I move when it matters." Another pause. Then he looked down at the folder again, at the numbers, at the reality of his situation. And I could see it happening in real time, the shift, from resistance to consideration. "You'd take on all liabilities?" he asked. "Yes." "Restructure operations?" "Yes." "And in return?" "I take majority ownership," I finished. He nodded slowly, still thinking, still calculating, but now he wasn't asking if, he was asking how. "Why?" he said finally. "Why this company?" I held his gaze. "Because yesterday," I said calmly, "your men were sent to remove me from my own property." His expression tightened slightly. "And I don't like being on the receiving end of bad decisions." That was the truth, simple, clear, and impossible to ignore. "So this is revenge," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "This is correction." Silence again. Then, a small, almost reluctant smile. "You're serious?" "I don't waste time." He closed the folder, set it down carefully, then looked me straight in the eye. "All right," he said. "Let's talk terms." And just like that, the company Betty trusted to enforce her power was already slipping out of her hands. She just didn't know it yet, but she would, soon. By the time Marcus Doyle walked out of my house, Ridgeline Security wasn't his company anymore. Not completely, but enough had shifted that control was no longer where Betty thought it was, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Quiet, unnoticed, dangerous. I don't announce moves, I position them. The paperwork was already in motion before Marcus even got back into his car. Legal teams, financial structuring, ownership transfer layers, everything designed to move fast without drawing attention. Because the moment Betty realized what was happening, she would panic. And panic makes people sloppy. I gave it 48 hours. That's all it took. By the end of the second day, I had controlling interest locked in through a layered acquisition, holding companies, silent partners, clean capital injection. On paper, it looked like Ridgeline had just secured emergency funding to stay afloat. In reality, it had just changed sides. Marcus stayed on, exactly as expected. Men like him don't walk away when there's still something to salvage. He wasn't stupid. He knew this was his best outcome. But he also knew one more thing now. He wasn't in charge anymore. I called him that evening. "It's done," I said. There was a pause on the line. Not surprise, just confirmation. "Yeah," he replied. "I saw the final structure. Clean work. I don't do messy." Another pause. Then his tone shifted slightly. "So, what now?" I looked out through the glass toward the street. Calm, controlled, just like always, but not for long. "Now," I said, "we fix your company." The next 24 hours were about restructuring. Not the kind that shows up in headlines, the kind that changes how things actually operate. First thing I did was shut down every active, enforcement-style contract Ridgeline had. No more gray area removals. No more intimidation jobs disguised as compliance. If it wasn't legally airtight, it was gone. Marcus pushed back on that. Those contracts bring in money, he said. They bring in risk, I corrected. And right now, risk is what almost killed your company. He didn't argue after that, because deep down, he knew. The second thing I did was reassign leadership. Field supervisors replaced. Operations tightened. Every team lead now reporting through a structure that I controlled directly. No more freelancing. No more assumptions. Everything documented. Everything accountable. And most importantly, everything legal. Because the next phase wasn't just about control. It was about exposure. By the end of the day, Ridgeline wasn't the same company Betty hired. It looked the same on the outside. Same name, same uniforms, same vehicles. But internally, completely different machine. And she had no idea. On the third morning, right on schedule, she made her next move. I was in my driveway again when I saw them coming. 2 SUVs this time. More controlled, more confident. She thought the first attempt failed because of execution, not because of me. That was her mistake. The vehicles stopped just short of the driveway. 4 guards stepped out, familiar faces, same team as before. But this time, they hesitated. Not obvious, not something anyone else would notice, but I did, because now they were working for me. The lead guard, same one from before, walked up slowly. His posture still professional, but there was something new in his expression. Uncertainty. "Mr. Carter," he said. I didn't respond immediately, just watched him. Let him feel it. Then, "Yes?" He glanced back at his team for half a second, then stepped closer. "We've been asked to return and complete the enforcement action," he said carefully. "By Betty," I replied. He didn't confirm it, didn't need to. I nodded slightly. Of course she did. There was a moment of silence. Then I took a step forward, calm, controlled. "You can go ahead," I said. That caught him off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I continued. "Do your job." Behind him, the other guards exchanged quick looks, confusion, tension. Something wasn't lining up, because this wasn't how these situations usually go. People argue, they resist, they escalate, they don't invite it. The lead guard frowned slightly. "Sir, we're authorized to—" "I know exactly what you think you're authorized to do," I interrupted. "The question is, are you actually going to do it?" That's when it hit him. Not fully, but enough. His jaw tightened, his stance shifted, and for the first time since he stepped out of that SUV, he looked unsure. Because somewhere between the last time he saw me and now, something had changed. He just didn't know what. Yet. "You should check with your office," I said quietly. That was it. That was the trigger. He stared at me for a second longer, then turned slightly, pulling out his phone. Good. Exactly what I wanted. He stepped away from the group, speaking in low tones. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I already knew how it would go, because Marcus had already been briefed. Every field operation now required direct approval, and this one was never getting it. A minute passed, then another. The tension in the air shifted, from control to confusion. Finally, the guard ended the call, turned back toward me, and in that moment, I saw it clearly, the realization. "We're standing down," he said. Behind him, the other guards straightened slightly. Not relieved, but aligned. Orders had changed. Authority had shifted, and they felt it. "Of course you are," I replied. He hesitated for a second, then nodded once, subtle, almost respectful. "Have a good day, Mr. Carter." That was new. Last time it was confrontation. This time, it was acknowledgement. They got back into the SUVs without another word. Engines started, vehicles reversed, and just like that, they left. Again. But this time, it was different, because this wasn't a failed attempt. This was a controlled withdrawal. And across the street, Betty saw everything. She stepped out of her house the second the SUVs started pulling away. No sunglasses this time, no composed smile, just confusion, and something else, frustration. She looked from the departing vehicles, to me, trying to understand what just happened, why her authority didn't work, why her plan didn't execute. I held her gaze, didn't move, didn't speak, just let her sit in that moment. Because this is the part people like her never prepare for. Not resistance, not conflict, but loss of control. And the worst part? She didn't even know why. Yet. She started walking toward me, fast, heels hitting the pavement harder than before. "This is unacceptable," she said the second she got close. "I gave them clear instructions." I didn't respond, just watched her. "They're refusing to act," she continued. "Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It means they're doing their job." Her expression tightened. "No," she snapped. "It means something has changed." I tilted my head slightly. "You're right." Silence. 1 second. 2. Then, "What did you do?" she asked. There it was, the first crack. Not in her system, in her confidence. I looked at her for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost casual shrug. "Nothing," I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. Because the truth was much worse than anything she was imagining, and she was about to find out. The hard way. By the next morning, Ridgeline security was fully under my control. The acquisition had gone through quietly, structured so Betty wouldn't notice until it was too late. The paperwork was clean, the legal teams aligned, and Marcus Doyle knew exactly what his role was. No mistakes, no exposure. Perfect execution. I stood on my balcony, watching the sun rise over the perfectly manicured lawns of the gated community. The calm before the storm. Betty was inside her house, likely scheming, unaware that the very muscle she thought she could rely on had just shifted allegiance. The realization that she couldn't rely on anyone outside herself, well, that was about to hit her hard. I picked up my phone and checked the internal communications from Ridgeline. Every field team had received updated orders directly from me. Not only were they now loyal to me, but they were also legally and operationally bound to act within strict compliance. Any attempt to execute her directives without my approval would be treated as mutiny. That night, I had a meeting with Marcus to finalize the operational plan. He arrived, briefed, and cautious as ever. "Everything is aligned?" I asked. "Yes, they won't step out of line," Marcus replied. "Good, because the next time Betty thinks she can send security to my house..." I let the sentence hang. No need to finish it. He understood. We spent hours restructuring the company's protocols. Contracts that Betty had relied on for enforcement? Terminated. Redundant personnel? Reassigned. New leadership reporting directly to me? Installed. Every layer of the company now ran exactly as I dictated. By the time the first security team reported to the neighborhood the following day, the change was already in motion. Betty had called them in, expecting the same obedience she had wielded before. The moment they approached my driveway, the tension was palpable. "Mr. Carter," the lead guard said hesitantly. "Yes," I replied calmly. "Ma'am, she wants us to enforce the order." I nodded slightly. "And?" I asked. He looked down at his phone. After a pause, he muttered, "We cannot. Orders come from the top now. Direct authorization required, not hers." I smiled faintly. The shift was complete. Behind me, I could see Betty stepping out of her house, her pink suit glaring in the morning sun. Confidence radiating, or at least she thought it did. She had no idea that the authority she wielded like a weapon had already slipped through her fingers. "What's going on?" she demanded, striding toward me. "I told them to enforce the order. Remove him from the property." "They've already reported back," I said smoothly. "Your authority no longer controls them." Her face tightened. The first cracks were showing. "No," she spat. "This can't happen. They work for me. They don't," I interrupted. "And they never will again." The realization hit her like ice. For the first time in decades, she faced a scenario where her power was nullified, and she couldn't do a thing about it. I watched her pace, fuming. Threats, yelling, frantic phone calls to unknown contacts, all irrelevant. She couldn't touch me. Not legally, not physically, not through Ridgeline. Her phone buzzed, and she answered quickly, likely calling someone higher up in the HOA, trying to fix the situation. I didn't care. I didn't even glance. Everything she relied on had been systematically taken from her. By noon, the news had quietly spread through the community. Neighbors began whispering about the strange change in Ridgeline's behavior. Security that once intimidated them now appeared controlled, professional, unyielding, but neutral. No longer a tool of coercion. And at the center of it all, I remained calm, observing, calculating. Betty's desperation escalated. I could see it clearly from my window. Calls, pacing, huffing, small, uncontrollable gestures of fear and frustration. And yet, she didn't know why. Because she didn't know the full extent of my moves. She didn't realize that Ridgeline wasn't just under my control, it was now mine to deploy. Every action, every operation, every enforcement could now be directed to serve my objectives. And my first objective? Let her realize, painfully, that the tools she used to intimidate me could now protect me instead of her. By evening, Marcus reported in. All teams are aligned, Edward. The structure is stable. They will act according to your directives. Good, I said. Prepare for the next phase. Betty's going to test her limits, and we need to be ready. But remember, no unnecessary confrontation. Let her realize her loss slowly, psychologically, painfully. There's a unique satisfaction in watching someone who relies on intimidation fail when confronted by controlled precision. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's devastating. By nightfall, I sat in my office, reviewing the property logs, communications, and Ridgeline's deployment. Everything was ready for the next encounter. Betty still believed she was in command. That illusion would last only as long as it took me to finish the setup, because once the next move happened, she would finally see the full scope of her mistake. She didn't just underestimate me, she underestimated her own overreach, and that would cost her everything. The next morning, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Word had started to spread, subtle, quiet murmurs about Ridgeline security behaving differently, about Edward Carter's calm yet controlled presence. People noticed, but none of them fully understood why. That was exactly how I wanted it. Control from the shadows is far more effective than noisy displays of power. Betty was the first to break the pattern. I saw her stepping out of her mansion early, checking the street, adjusting her pink power suit as if the fabric itself could shield her from the reality she was about to face. Confidence radiated outward, but it was superficial. The first crack was already forming. Inside my house, I was monitoring Ridgeline's internal communications. Marcus had sent me detailed logs of all field operations, and every single directive now passed through my control. No exceptions, no ambiguity. Every team member, every squad, knew exactly where their loyalties now lay. Betty didn't notice the subtle shift yet, but it would be impossible for her to ignore it for long. By mid-morning, she had called one of her HOA allies, a board member named Richard. He arrived, attempting to exude authority and control, but even he was uncertain. Ridgeline guards politely but firmly blocked him from entering my driveway, citing corporate authorization from headquarters, which of course now meant me. "What's going on?" Richard asked, his voice a little too loud for civility. "They're not following your orders anymore," I said calmly, standing on my porch with coffee in hand. "You'll need direct authorization from their new leadership to act here." He hesitated, realizing he couldn't override the guards. The tension shifted, and I could see it, the first cracks of fear and confusion forming in Betty's carefully constructed facade. Then she stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "Edward Carter, this is completely unacceptable," she shouted, her voice carrying down the street. "I am the HOA president. You will comply with my orders." I didn't flinch. Calm is a weapon people rarely anticipate. "You are the HOA president," I said evenly. "And yet, Ridgeline Security reports to me now. Authority is real power, Betty, not titles. You've lost it, and you don't even see it yet." Her eyes narrowed. She wanted to argue, to threaten, to regain some semblance of control, but the truth was already settling in. Her security had betrayed her, not intentionally, but structurally. I had shifted the power lines underneath her feet. I called Marcus on speakerphone. "Show them the corporate hierarchy," I instructed. Within minutes, Ridgeline's new reporting structure appeared on the screen of a tablet I held in front of Betty. She squinted at it, disbelief written across her face. This isn't possible," she said, her voice shaky. "It is," I replied, "and it's only the beginning." The psychological impact was immediate. Betty's carefully cultivated image of power in the community was crumbling. Board members began to whisper among themselves. Neighbors peeked from windows. Even the delivery guy on the street glanced over nervously, sensing the shift. You can't do this," she stammered, her voice rising in desperation. This is illegal." I shook my head slowly. Legality isn't in question. Ridgeline's internal compliance is intact, and every move is fully legal. What's illegal is assuming loyalty is guaranteed because of a title. Her fists clenched, and for a moment, she looked like a predator caught in a trap. But the trap was only beginning to close. By mid-afternoon, Betty's panic spread across the HOA board. They realized her authority was compromised, and the ripple effect began. Board members questioned her decisions for the first time. Her allies, seeing the subtle but total control I now held over Ridgeline, started to hesitate. Some even whispered about withdrawing support. I didn't intervene. I let her unravel on her own. Watching someone lose control, especially someone who thrives on it, is far more satisfying than any confrontation. Late in the evening, Betty made a final attempt. She marched to my driveway, this time flanked by 2 HOA board members, trying to assert dominance through sheer numbers. I stepped outside, still calm, still in control. "Betty," I said evenly, "you're trying to command something you no longer have. Ridgeline security follows the structure I now control. They will not act on your orders. Every attempt you make to enforce this without approval will be logged, and every violation will be addressed legally. That includes you." Her jaw tightened, reddened face, pink suit immaculate but powerless. She stared at me, realizing that the very system she used to intimidate and control was now her undoing. Every threat she had relied on had been turned against her, subtly, legally, and psychologically. I stepped back inside, leaving her standing in the street. She didn't follow. She couldn't, because control is invisible until it's removed, and once removed, it can never be taken back easily. By nightfall, the first murmurs of her public humiliation began to circulate within the community. Board members, neighbors, and even local contractors had started noticing the shift in Ridgeline Security's behavior. Betty's power was fracturing. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat in my office, watching the lights of the community reflect in the darkened windows. Every move had been precise. Every step measured. The next phase, public exposure, legal escalation, and complete dismantling of her authority, was ready to unfold. And when it did, Betty wouldn't just lose control. She would lose everything she had built, every alliance, every influence, every ounce of authority. She had made the first move. I was simply responding, strategically, patiently, and decisively. By the end of this chapter, the HOA president, the very person who tried to remove me from my own property, was beginning to realize that the game had changed, and she was losing. The following morning, the neighborhood was quiet, but tense. Something had shifted, though no one outside my property could put a finger on it. Betty, however, felt it. She paced in her pink power suit, phone glued to her ear, barking orders to anyone who would listen. Her carefully constructed image of authority had begun to crumble, and she didn't know how to stop it. Inside my office, I sat calmly, reviewing Ridgeline's logs and operational reports. Every guard, every team, every field supervisor was now fully aligned with me, not out of fear, not out of coercion, but because the structure now demanded loyalty to the person in charge, me. Their previous employer, Betty, no longer had the authority to dictate their actions, and she would learn that lesson the hard way. I made my first strategic move of the day. Ridgeline's field teams quietly began surveilling the HOA office, recording every interaction, every attempt by Betty to manipulate or coerce the board members. Every phone call she made, every directive she issued, was now being documented. It wasn't illegal, yet, but the evidence was building. Public exposure was coming. By mid-morning, I stepped outside to take in the neighborhood. The guards were visible but unobtrusive, making sure that Betty's next attempt to send enforcement toward me would fail without creating a spectacle. I could see her across the street, checking every corner, trying to gauge Ridgeline's loyalty. She didn't notice the subtle signs, the brief nods between guards, their calm composure, the lack of any reaction to her commands. She was blind to the change. Her frustration was becoming apparent. She muttered to herself, waved at a board member for backup, and even tried to call the local police to intervene. By now, the pattern was clear. The officers, already wary from the first failed attempt to intimidate me, had grown cautious. Any false claim or attempt to manipulate law enforcement would now have serious consequences. I didn't need to do anything. Her panic and overreach were working in my favor. Late morning, I received a call from Marcus Doyle. "Edward, the Ridgeline teams are in position. We're documenting all HOA interactions and every order coming from Betty. The board members are already questioning her directives." "Good," I replied calmly. "Let them realize it themselves. No need to push overtly. Let the unraveling be natural. Public humiliation is far more effective when self-inflicted." By noon, the HOA board members had started whispering among themselves, observing Betty's frantic attempts to regain authority. Conversations about transparency, accountability, and legal obligations began surfacing in small pockets. People started questioning her leadership, some quietly, some audibly. Betty tried to intervene, stepping out of her office, voice raised, pointing at staff and board members. "This is a matter of authority. You will comply." No one moved. Not the staff, not the board. The guards remained stationed strategically, obeying only my directives, and Ridgeline's presence alone was enough to reinforce the shift. I appeared on my front porch, casually observing the scene. Her anger was building. The slight twitch of her jaw, the redness in her face, and the way she stomped her heels. Small but unmistakable signs of a woman losing control. I said nothing. My silence was deliberate. Watching her unravel was more effective than any argument I could make. By mid-afternoon, whispers became louder. Board members were openly discussing her credibility. The HOA community, who once feared her, began seeing her vulnerabilities. Each small misstep, each raised voice, each desperate phone call she made, was now evidence of her incompetence and instability. Then I made the next move, a subtle one, yet impactful. I authorized Ridgeline to intervene in a staged but legal way. The guards escorted 2 individuals who had attempted to enforce Betty's latest orders from her office back to my driveway. They were polite but firm, following my new chain of command, and explained that their previous attempts were not authorized. Betty froze, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to argue. She realized the guards weren't obeying her anymore. Panic started creeping in. I stepped toward her calmly, voice measured. "Betty, you gave them orders that can no longer be executed. Authority is not a title. Authority is control. You've lost yours." Her pink suit seemed smaller now, like armor that couldn't protect her from reality. She glared at me, but I remained unshaken. This was the moment I had engineered for weeks. Her recognition that the very tools she had wielded to intimidate me were now aligned with me, her opposition. By late evening, the HOA office was in quiet chaos. Board members had begun openly questioning Betty's decisions. Complaints were being logged. Discussions about restructuring and oversight were taking place without her influence. And through it all, Ridgeline was documenting every interaction for a future legal and public campaign. I sat in my office once more, reviewing the day's logs. Every detail recorded, every violation noted, every power shift quantified. The stage was set. The board was questioning her publicly. The community had begun to notice the cracks. Betty's panic was escalating daily, and the moment of full exposure was approaching. As night fell, I poured a glass of whiskey and leaned back, reflecting on the transformation. Betty had believed her authority was unshakable. She had relied on intimidation, private security, and political connections. But all of it had been neutralized, not through confrontation, but through precision, planning, and control. The next phase, complete legal exposure and public humiliation, would finalize the collapse of her reign. And Ridgeline security, once a weapon she used against me, was now the instrument of her destruction. By the end of this chapter, Betty no longer had subtle influence, covert intimidation, or fear on her side. She was isolated, powerless, and on the verge of losing everything she had built. The morning was unusually still. almost as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I knew today would mark the culmination of weeks of careful planning, subtle power shifts, and strategic positioning. Betty's unraveling had begun days ago, but now, with Ridgeline fully under my control, it was time to finish what I started. I reviewed the operational logs one last time. Every guard, every field supervisor, every piece of internal communication aligned perfectly. Marcus Doyle had executed the restructuring flawlessly. Ridgeline wasn't just a security company anymore. It was a tool I could deploy with surgical precision, legally, and without causing suspicion. Betty, meanwhile, was in a state of controlled panic. I could see her from my porch, pacing in her pink suit, yelling into her phone. Her usual air of authority was gone, replaced with frustration, confusion, and growing fear. Each failed attempt to regain control only reinforced the inevitability of her loss. The HOA board had already begun to question her publicly. Small murmurs had become louder, and by yesterday evening, whispers had escalated into open discussion. Board members who once deferred to her now challenged her every decision, every mandate, every move. And Ridgeline documented every interaction. The seeds of her public humiliation were already growing. I stepped into the driveway as two Ridgeline SUVs approached, this time carrying legal documents and recorded evidence. Marcus was with them. His expression was calm, professional, and unwavering. "Everything ready?" I asked. "Ready," Marcus replied. "All documents, all logs, all evidence of non-compliance and misuse of authority. The HOA and local authorities have been notified and will act accordingly." Perfect. I watched as the vehicle stopped, the guards stepping out, maintaining strict protocol. They weren't here to intimidate or enforce. They were here to demonstrate legal authority and procedural correctness. The contrast with Betty's chaotic attempts could not have been clearer. Betty appeared at the edge of her driveway, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Edward!" she shouted, attempting to regain control, but her voice was trembling now. "What is this? Who authorized this?" I remained calm, projecting the composure that had dismantled her influence piece by piece. "Betty," I said evenly, "this is authorized by the proper channels. All evidence is documented, and Ridgeline Security is following lawful directives. Your authority no longer applies here." Her face paled. Her usual swagger was gone. The board members who had come with her now looked uneasy, whispering to each other, questioning their loyalties, uncertain of the legal and procedural landscape. I gestured to Marcus. "Show them the evidence," I said. One by one, the logs, recordings, and internal communications were displayed. Every order she had issued that violated regulations, every attempt to manipulate the board or law enforcement, every intimidation tactic, all laid bare. Betty's pink suit, once a symbol of dominance, now seemed a costume of embarrassment. She stammered, trying to argue, but the facts were undeniable. Her political connections, her HOA title, her threats, none could outweigh the legal and operational reality she now faced. The board began asking questions aloud. "Betty, is this true? Have these violations occurred? Why were these actions taken without our oversight?" Her voice cracked. It's not what it looks like. I was trying to enforce the rules." I stepped closer, calm and precise. "Enforcing rules doesn't mean breaking laws, Betty. It doesn't mean sending security to intimidate property owners. And it certainly doesn't mean manipulating the police. Every action you took outside the law has been documented. And now," I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "The consequences are unfolding." Her fists clenched. Tears glimmered in the corners of her eyes as she realized the scale of her defeat. Over the next hour, Ridgeline coordinated with local authorities and legal teams to serve formal notices of violation, evidence submissions, and preliminary steps toward her personal and professional accountability. The HOA board, now aware of her mismanagement and misuse of power, began the formal process of suspending her from authority, initiating internal audits, and restructuring governance to prevent future abuse. Betty's attempts to counteract the process were futile. Every call, every directive, every attempt to leverage her network was neutralized by the combination of Ridgeline's controlled structure and the legal framework I had put in place. By evening, she stood alone in front of the board, humiliated. Publicly, legally, and socially, her power had collapsed. Her pink suit, once a symbol of dominance, now appeared as a relic of arrogance. I watched from my office as she left the community center, flanked not by fear-stricken followers, but by the legal weight of her actions. The same woman who had tried to have me removed from my property now had no influence, no leverage, and no path to reclaim her authority. I poured a drink and leaned back, letting the scene sink in. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was surgical, calculated, and complete. Betty's collapse was total. Her HOA reign had ended. Ridgeline security, the very force she had tried to wield against me, had been turned into the instrument of her downfall. Every board member, every neighbor, every professional connection she once relied on had seen her vulnerability. By the time the sun set, she had been publicly humiliated, legally exposed, and socially dismantled. The HOA members turned against her. Her political connections failed to intervene. Her private security, her supposed weapon, was now mine, enforcing the law and protecting my property. I raised my glass in silence. Precision, patience, control. That was the difference between someone who pretends to hold power and someone who actually commands it. Betty had learned it the hard way, and I, Edward Carter, had ensured she would never forget it.